The crystalline palace of Zephyria gleamed under the light of three suns, its towering spires reaching toward the heavens like the claws of some ancient beast. Within the grand throne room, Queen Valestra sat upon her seat of living coral, her 6 arms gracefully arranged as she held court. Her serpentine lower body coiled beneath the throne, scales shimmering with an otherworldly iridescence that spoke of her royal bloodline. The Galactic Council had convened on her world for the trials of supremacy, a tradition as old as interstellar civilization itself. Representatives from 100 worlds had gathered to witness the selection of the new Guardian of the Outer Rim, a position that would grant immense power and responsibility over the frontier territories where pirates and raiders threatened peaceful worlds. Valestra's compound eyes swept across the assembled aliens with barely concealed disdain. The Crothery warriors stood in their beetle-like armor, mandibles clicking nervously. The floating ethereals pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, their gaseous forms contained within force fields. The reptilian saurians hissed and postured, their claws scraping against the polished floor. And then, there was the human. Commander Marcus Chen stood apart from the others, his presence somehow both unremarkable and unsettling. Unlike the other candidates who wore elaborate armor or displayed their natural weapons, the human appeared almost plain. His armor was a dull gray, scratched and worn from countless battles. No decorative plumes or gleaming surfaces caught the light. No ceremonial weapons adorned his belt. He simply stood there, hands clasped behind his back, watching everything with those strange, forward-facing eyes that marked him as a predator species. So, Queen Valestra's voice rang out across the chamber, her tone dripping with amusement. "The council sends us a human." She leaned forward on her throne, her multiple eyes focusing on Marcus with the intensity of a laser. "Tell me, little mammal, what makes you think you're worthy to stand among true warriors?" A ripple of nervous laughter echoed through the chamber. The other candidates shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging glances that spoke of their own doubts about the human's presence. After all, humanity was still relatively new to galactic society. They had been spacefaring for less than 3 centuries, while most of the assembled species had been traveling the stars for millennia. Marcus remained silent for a moment, his gaze steady as he met the Queen's stare. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured. "Your Majesty honors me with this opportunity. I ask for nothing more than the chance to prove myself in the trials." The Queen's laughter was like the sound of wind chimes in a hurricane. "Prove yourself? Child, look around you. Do you see Commander Thok there?" She gestured with one of her arms toward a massive Crothery warrior whose carapace was decorated with the skulls of his enemies. "He has conquered 17 worlds in single combat. His mandibles have tasted the blood of 1,000 foes." Thok clicked his mandibles proudly, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "And there," the Queen continued, pointing to an ethereal being whose form shifted like smoke, "is Whisper of Storms. She can phase through solid matter and strike from dimensions your primitive mind cannot even comprehend. Her people have mastered warfare in 11 different planes of existence." The ethereal pulsed with soft blue light, acknowledging the praise. Even young Sektar, Valestra indicated a Saurian whose scales were painted with war markings, has led his clan's warriors in the blood campaigns of the Spiral Arm. His claws have never failed to find their mark, and his roar can shatter the hull of a starship. Sektar hissed his agreement, displaying rows of razor-sharp teeth. The Queen's gaze returned to Marcus, and her expression became almost pitying. "But, you, human, what have you done? Your species is barely out of their home system. You fight with crude projectile weapons and chemical explosives. Your armor looks like it was cobbled together from scrap metal. You have no natural weapons, no inherent abilities that make you special. You're just ordinary." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could feel the weight of every gaze in the room upon him. Some looked at him with pity, others with barely concealed contempt. A few seemed genuinely curious to see how he would respond to such a public humiliation. "Your Majesty speaks truly," Marcus said quietly. "I have no great conquests to my name. No legendary victories that bards sing of across the galaxy. My armor is indeed old and worn." He paused, his hand moving unconsciously to a small patch on his chestplate, worn smooth by countless touches. "But, if I may, I would like to tell you about this armor." The Queen waved one of her hands dismissively. Spare us your sentimental attachments to inferior equipment. It belonged to my daughter, Marcus continued, ignoring the interruption. She was a Marine, like me. Deployed to the Kepler station when the Void Raiders attacked 3 years ago. A subtle shift occurred in the chamber. The casual mockery that had filled the air moments before began to dissipate as something harder, more focused, took its place. The station housed 40,000 civilians, Marcus went on, his voice never changing in tone or volume. Miners, traders, families. The raiders came in force, expecting easy prey. They found Sergeant Sarah Chen and her squad of 20 Marines instead. Queen Valestra's expression began to change as well, though she tried to hide it. Something in the human's voice, a quality she couldn't quite identify, was making her uncomfortable. For 6 hours, those 20 Marines held the evacuation points. They bought time for 39,000 civilians to escape. Marcus's hand pressed against the worn patch on his armor. Sarah's squad held until the very end. Until every last civilian was safely away. The raiders never understood what hit them. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the palace's systems seemed muted. When the rescue fleet arrived, they found the raiders had fled. 20 dead Marines. And 40,000 people who got to go home to their families. Marcus looked up at the Queen, and, for the first time, she saw something in those predator eyes that made her six-armed form tense involuntarily. So yes, Your Majesty, my armor is old and worn. It's been to hell and back. And it knows what it means to stand when standing is the only thing between innocent life and those who would destroy it. The Queen found herself momentarily speechless. Around the chamber, the other candidates were looking at the human with new eyes. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by something approaching respect. But Valestra was not one to be outdone by a mere human. She straightened on her throne, her scales shifting to a more aggressive. Then, why do the strong so often find themselves alone in the end, surrounded by the ashes of everything they thought they were protecting? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Queen Valestra felt a flash of anger at the human's audacity. How dare this primitive creature question the natural order? How dare he imply that her understanding of power was somehow flawed? You will see, she said, her voice cold as the void between stars. When the trials begin, we will all see what human strength truly amounts to. I predict it will be a very short demonstration. Marcus inclined his head slightly. I look forward to the opportunity, Your Majesty. As the court session continued, the Queen found herself repeatedly glancing at the human. There was something about him that nagged at her, something that didn't fit her understanding of how lesser species should behave. He showed no fear, no deference beyond basic courtesy. He stood among warriors who could tear him apart with their bare hands, and he seemed utterly unimpressed by their displays of power. It was irritating. Later that evening, as the Queen held private council with her advisors, she found herself still thinking about the exchange. My Queen, her chief advisor, an ancient Zephyrian named Korath, spoke carefully. Perhaps we should research this human's background more thoroughly. The way he spoke. The way he spoke was irrelevant, Valestra snapped. He's a mammal pretending to be a warrior. Tomorrow's trials will expose him for what he really is. But, even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Marcus Chen than met the eye. The worn patch on his armor, the quiet certainty in his voice, the way he had spoken of his daughter's sacrifice, there had been something there, something that reminded her uncomfortably of the old stories her grandmother used to tell about the first warriors of her people. She pushed the thought away. Humans were newcomers, primitives barely worthy of notice. The trials would prove that, once and for all. Outside her palace windows, the 3 sons of Zephyria sat one by one, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the guest quarters, Marcus Chen sat by his window, carefully cleaning and checking his weapons with the methodical precision of a lifetime soldier. The armor that had drawn so much mockery lay beside him, every piece inspected and maintained with loving care. Tomorrow would bring the first trial. Tomorrow would begin to answer the question of what humanity was truly capable of when pushed to its limits. The Queen expected a quick demonstration of human weakness. She was about to learn that sometimes, the galaxy's greatest mistakes came from underestimating those who seemed unremarkable on the surface. The arena of 1,000 deaths had witnessed bloodshed for over 2 millennia. Carved from a single massive asteroid and transported to Zephyria's orbit, it hung in space like a metallic moon, its surface scarred by countless battles. The arena's interior could shift and change, creating any environment imaginable for combat. Today, it had been configured as a maze of crystalline corridors and chambers filled with automated defenses and lurking dangers. Queen Valestra watched from her royal viewing platform as the 5 candidates prepared for the first trial. The rules were simple: navigate the maze, survive its traps, and reach the center where a signal beacon waited to be activated. The first to reach it would earn significant points toward the final selection. More importantly, it would prove who truly deserved to be called a warrior. "Begin the trial," the Queen's voice echoed through the arena's communication system. Commander Thok immediately charged forward, his massive crottery frame smashing through the first crystal barrier with brute force. His mandibles clicked excitedly as he carved a direct path toward the center, his thick carapace deflecting the energy beams that shot from hidden emplacements. Behind him, the corridor filled with the acrid smoke of melted crystal and scorched metal. Whisper of Storms took a more elegant approach, her ethereal form phasing through the solid walls entirely. She moved like flowing water, untouchable and swift, navigating the maze as if its barriers didn't exist. Energy weapons fired uselessly through her gaseous form as she drifted toward the center with serene confidence. Sektar chose stealth over force, his reptilian body pressed low to the ground as he slithered through the shadows. His heat-sensing organs allowed him to detect the warm components of the automated defenses, and his claws made quick work of their circuitry. Where the others left destruction or passed through untouched, he left deactivated systems and precisely sabotaged equipment. The Queen turned her attention to the human, expecting to see him struggling with the maze's defenses or perhaps already eliminated by the first trap. Instead, she found Marcus moving through the corridors with deliberate, methodical precision that was both fascinating and infuriating to watch. He didn't charge like Thok or phase like Whisper of Storms. He didn't rely on natural abilities like Sektar. Instead, he seemed to be thinking 3 steps ahead of every obstacle. When energy weapons fired at him, he wasn't where they expected him to be. When floor panels collapsed into hidden pits, he had already chosen a different route. When walls of force sprang up to block his path, he had already found another way around. How is he doing that? Queen Valestra demanded of her advisors. Korath, her ancient counselor, studied the human's movements carefully. "My queen, he appears to be reading the maze's patterns. Notice how he pauses at each intersection, how he examines the scorch marks and damage patterns left by the others. He's learning from their encounters." "That's impossible," the Queen snapped. "The maze's defenses are randomized. There are no patterns to learn." But, even as she said it, she could see that Marcus was indeed following some kind of logic that eluded the others. He moved like someone who understood the maze's purpose, not just its immediate threats. While the other candidates focused on overcoming obstacles through superior abilities, the human seemed to be solving a puzzle. 20 minutes into the trial, Thok reached the first major checkpoint, a chamber filled with floating crystal spikes that fired concentrated energy beams. His approach was direct and brutal. He simply tanked the damage, his natural armor absorbing most of the punishment while he smashed his way through the obstacles. The watching crowd cheered as he emerged, battered but victorious, from the other side. 5 minutes later, Whisper of Storms flowed through the same chamber like smoke through a screen door, untouchable and ethereal. Her display of otherworldly ability drew appreciative murmurs from the alien dignitaries in the viewing galleries. Sektar took a different approach entirely, using his claws to short out the power relays that fed the crystal spikes. The chamber went dark and still, allowing him to pass through safely while maintaining his energy for later challenges. When Marcus reached the same chamber, he stopped at the entrance for a full minute, studying the layout. The Queen leaned forward on her throne, expecting to finally see the human meet his match. The crystal spikes were designed to track movement and fire with split-second timing. Without natural armor like Thok, phasing abilities like Whisper of Storms, or the technical knowledge that Sektar possessed, how could a mere human possibly succeed? Marcus reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out what looked like a handful of small metal spheres. The Queen's enhanced vision could make out intricate details. They appeared to be some kind of primitive grenades or explosive devices. How crude, she thought. He plans to simply blow his way through like a barbarian. But, instead of throwing the spheres at the crystal spikes, Marcus tossed them into the chamber in a seemingly random pattern. As they rolled across the floor, the automated defenses immediately targeted them, filling the air with a dazzling display of energy beams. For 30 seconds, the chamber became a light show of destructive force as the defensive systems fired frantically at the small, moving targets. Then, the beams stopped. The crystal spikes had exhausted their power cells, overloaded by the sudden demand to fire continuously at multiple targets. Marcus walked calmly through the now dormant chamber, collecting his spent decoy devices as he passed. They hadn't been explosives at all, just simple metal spheres designed to trigger motion sensors and draw automated fire. Clever, Korath murmured. He turned the defenses against themselves. Queen Valestra said nothing, but her grip on her throne's armrests tightened. That level of tactical thinking was unexpected from a species she had dismissed as primitives. The trial continued for another hour. Each candidate faced increasingly dangerous challenges: rooms filled with toxic gas, corridors that shifted and changed while you were inside them, chambers where artificial gravity reversed without warning. Thok powered through everything with brute strength and determination. Whisper of Storms flowed around obstacles like water finding cracks in stone. Sektar used cunning and his natural abilities to overcome each challenge with minimal effort. And Marcus continued to think his way through every problem he encountered. When faced with a room full of poisonous gas, he didn't try to hold his breath or push through like Thok. He didn't phase through the walls like Whisper of Storms or use biotechnology to filter the air like Sektar. Instead, he observed that the gas was heavier than air, settling toward the floor. He climbed along the ceiling, using his armor's magnetic clamps to traverse the room upside down, staying in the thin layer of breathable atmosphere near the top. When trapped in a corridor that began shifting and rotating, threatening to crush anyone inside, he didn't flee or try to force his way out. Instead, he wedged himself into a corner where the mechanical stress was lowest and rode out the transformation, emerging unharmed when the movement stopped. Each solution was elegant in its simplicity, devastating in its effectiveness. The Queen found herself watching the human more than the other candidates, fascinated despite herself by his unconventional approaches. The final challenge was the central chamber itself. The 5 candidates arrived at roughly the same time, having taken different routes through the maze. The beacon they needed to activate sat on a pedestal in the center of a large circular room. But between them and their goal was a single guardian, a massive war drone armed with enough firepower to level a city block. The drone was a masterpiece of defensive engineering, floating in the center of the chamber on anti-grav fields. Its multiple weapon systems could track and engage several targets simultaneously, and its armor was designed to withstand assault from heavy military vehicles. It was, by any reasonable measure, invincible to individual combatants. Thok attacked first, of course. His charge was magnificent in its futility. The drone's weapons tracked him effortlessly, filling the air with coherent energy that would have vaporized most beings instantly. Thok's natural armor saved him from immediate death, but he was driven back, his carapace cracked and smoking. Whisper of Storms tried next, attempting to phase through the drone's defenses directly. But the machine was equipped with multi-dimensional sensors and weapons. Energy beams followed her gaseous form through several phases of existence, forcing her to retreat to a more solid form and seek cover. Sektar's attempt was more subtle. He tried to work his way around the chamber's perimeter, seeking access to the drone's control systems. But the machine's sensors detected his approach long before he could get close enough to do damage, and a sustained barrage forced him to abandon the attempt. The 3 alien warriors regrouped behind various pieces of cover, clearly rethinking their strategies. The drone hung motionless in the center of the chamber, waiting patiently for their next attempt. Marcus stepped into the chamber. The Queen leaned forward again, her multiple eyes focusing intently on the human. This was it, the moment when his primitive tactics would finally prove inadequate. The war drone was beyond anything cunning or cleverness could overcome. It required raw power, advanced technology, or supernatural abilities. The human possessed none of these things. Marcus walked steadily toward the center of the chamber. He didn't run, didn't seek cover, didn't try to circle around for a better angle. He simply walked in a straight line toward the most dangerous war machine any of them had encountered. The drone's sensors locked onto him immediately. Warning lights flashed along its hull as its weapon systems came online. Multiple targeting lasers painted red dots across Marcus's chest and helmet. And Marcus kept walking. The drone fired. Every weapon system it possessed unleashed hell at the approaching human. Energy beams that could melt through starship armor, projectiles that could punch through mountain rock, and force waves that could shatter crystal, all focused on a single target. The barrage lasted exactly 3.7 seconds. When the light faded and the smoke cleared, Marcus was still walking. His armor was scorched black, pieces of it hanging in tatters, but he was moving steadily forward. Steam rose from his form, and sparks occasionally arced between damaged components, but he showed no sign of slowing down. The drone fired again. And again. Each barrage was more intense than the last, as if the machine was growing frustrated with its inability to stop the advancing human. Marcus reached the pedestal and calmly activated the beacon. The trial was over. In the sudden silence that followed, Queen Valestra stared at her monitors in shock. The other candidates looked equally stunned. How had the human survived what should have been instant death? Replay the engagement, the Queen commanded. Full spectrum analysis. The recording played again, this time with sensor overlays showing energy patterns and impact data. What they revealed was impossible, yet undeniable. Marcus hadn't dodged the drone's weapons. He hadn't blocked them or deflected them. He had simply absorbed damage that should have killed him instantly, and kept moving forward. His armor, that crude, worn equipment the Queen had mocked, had somehow dissipated enough energy to keep him alive. Not unharmed, the readouts showed massive trauma to his life signs, but alive and functional. How, she whispered. On the monitor, she watched Marcus emerge from the beacon chamber, his movements now noticeably slower and more careful. He passed the other candidates, who stared at him with expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. But it was what he did next that truly shocked her. Instead of leaving the arena, Marcus turned back toward the war drone, which was still floating in the center of its chamber. He pulled what appeared to be a small repair kit from his belt and began working on the machine's damaged sensors, damage that his passage had caused when the drone's own weapons had created feedback loops trying to track him. He was repairing the equipment that had just tried to kill him. Queen Valestra found herself standing without realizing it, her 6 arms gripping the railing of her viewing platform. Down in the arena, the human worked with quiet efficiency to restore the war drone to full functionality, treating it not as a defeated enemy but as a piece of equipment that deserved proper maintenance. When he finally left the arena, he paused at the exit and turned back to look directly at the royal viewing platform. Even across the vast distance, the Queen could feel the weight of his gaze. He inclined his head slightly, the same polite gesture he had made in court the day before, and walked away. The Queen remained standing long after he disappeared from view, staring at the arena where impossible things had just become reality. In the arena, Queen Valestra had personally overseen the design of a challenge that would expose the human's limitations once and for all. No amount of tactical thinking or primitive stubbornness could overcome what she had planned. The trial ground was a recreation of the massacre at Bitter Creek, one of the most infamous battles in galactic history. A century ago, a single Void Raider dreadnought had held off an entire fleet of Republic warships for 18 hours, using superior firepower and tactical positioning to inflict devastating casualties. The simulation placed each candidate in command of a small fleet of escort vessels, tasked with neutralizing a recreated version of that legendary raider. It was a test of strategic thinking, leadership under pressure, and the ability to coordinate multiple units in complex combat. More importantly, it was designed to showcase the advanced military doctrines that the great galactic civilizations had perfected over millennia of warfare. Queen Valestra watched from her command center as the candidates took their positions in separate simulation pods. Each would face the same scenario, unaware of how the others performed. The Raider dreadnought was a perfect recreation, down to the last detail, massive, heavily armored, bristling with weapons that could reduce starships to debris in seconds. Thought went first. His approach was predictably direct, a frontal assault with all vessels advancing in formation. The results were spectacular and brief. The Crothery commander's aggressive tactics resulted in the destruction of his entire fleet within 12 minutes. He had managed to inflict some damage on the dreadnought's outer armor, but nothing that would significantly impair its combat effectiveness. "Brave but foolish," the Queen murmured. Typical of his species. Whisper of Storms demonstrated the ethereal approach to naval combat, swift, elegant maneuvers designed to strike at weak points while avoiding direct confrontation. Her performance was significantly better, lasting nearly 30 minutes and actually managing to disable some of the dreadnought's secondary weapon systems. However, her fleet lacked the firepower to penetrate the raider's main armor, and eventually attrition claimed her vessels one by one. Sektar's attempt was the most sophisticated so far. The Saurian commander used cunning and misdirection, sending some vessels on apparent suicide runs while others struck from unexpected angles. He managed to trick the dreadnought into exposing its weaker rear armor twice, achieving significant damage to its engine systems. His fleet lasted 41 minutes, and, for a moment it seemed he might actually succeed. But, in the end, superior firepower told, and his remaining ships were overwhelmed. "Excellent," the Queen said with satisfaction. "The Saurian shows promise. Now let us see how the primitive human embarrasses himself." But, as Marcus's simulation began, something immediately felt different. Instead of rushing to engage the enemy, his fleet spread out in a formation that the Queen didn't recognize. The ships moved slowly, almost cautiously, maintaining precise distances from each other while advancing toward the dreadnought's position. "What is he doing?" demanded Admiral Corax, the Queen's military advisor. "That formation exposes his flanks and reduces concentrated firepower. It's tactically unsound." The dreadnought opened fire as soon as the human fleet came within range. The Queen expected to see ships vaporized instantly, as had happened in every previous simulation. Instead, something remarkable occurred. The human vessels began to dance. There was no other word for it. As the dreadnought's massive weapons tracked and fired, Marcus's ships moved in perfect coordination, each vessel's movement complementing the others in a complex three-dimensional ballet. When one ship was forced to evade incoming fire, another moved to cover its position. When the dreadnought focused its attention on one section of the formation, the ships there scattered while others closed in from different angles. It was like watching a school of fish evade a predator if fish could shoot back with military-grade plasma cannons. "Impossible," Admiral Corax breathed. "No one can coordinate that many vessels with such precision. The reaction time alone." But Marcus was doing exactly that. His fleet flowed around the dreadnought's weapons fire like water, striking whenever the massive ship's attention was focused elsewhere, melting back into evasive patterns whenever it turned its guns in their direction. The Queen found herself leaning forward, her multiple eyes tracking the intricate movements on the tactical display. This wasn't any military doctrine she recognized. It wasn't the massed formations favored by the Crothery, the hit-and-run tactics of the Ethereals, or even the deception-based strategies of the Saurians. It was something entirely new. "Admiral," she said slowly, "what tactical doctrine is the human employing?" Corax studied the displays with growing confusion. I don't recognize it, Your Majesty. It appears to be some form of coordinated swarming behavior, but I've never seen it applied to naval combat." The battle continued for over an hour. The dreadnought, despite its overwhelming advantages in firepower and armor, found itself unable to bring its weapons to bear effectively. Every time it focused on one section of the human fleet, the other ships struck at vulnerable systems. When it tried to engage multiple targets simultaneously, its fire became too dispersed to achieve decisive results. Slowly, methodically, the human fleet was taking the massive raider apart piece by piece. "This is impossible," the Queen whispered. "The simulation parameters are exact. No one has ever defeated that dreadnought." But Marcus was doing exactly that. His ships had damaged the raider's main weapons, crippled its engines, and were now systematically destroying its secondary systems. The massive vessel, which had seemed invincible at the start of the engagement, was being reduced to a helpless hulk by a swarm of smaller ships that refused to stay still long enough to be killed. When the simulation finally ended with the dreadnought's destruction, silence filled the command center. The Queen stared at the tactical display, where the wreckage of the legendary raider drifted in space while Marcus's fleet maintained formation around it. "Bring up his tactical communications," she ordered. The recording began to play, and, immediately the Queen understood how the impossible had become reality. Marcus hadn't been commanding his ships like a traditional admiral, issuing specific orders to individual vessels. Instead, he had been conducting them like a symphony orchestra, using brief, coded communications to adjust the overall pattern of their movements. Blue section, shift to harmony pattern 7, his voice came through the speakers. Red section, take the melody on my mark. Green section, prepare for the bridge sequence. It was musical terminology, not military jargon. The human had been treating the battle like a piece of music, with his ships as instruments playing in perfect harmony. How did he coordinate their movements so precisely? Admiral Corax demanded. The processing power required to calculate optimal positioning for that many units simultaneously. He wasn't calculating, the Queen said quietly. He was feeling it. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The human hadn't been thinking through the tactical situation in the way that she or any other commander would have. He had been responding to it intuitively, treating the flow of battle like a natural phenomenon that could be guided rather than controlled. It was completely alien to everything she understood about warfare, and it had been devastatingly effective. Your Majesty, Corax said carefully, if the human can apply this doctrine to real naval combat. I know, she said sharply. The implications were staggering. A commander who could coordinate fleet actions with that level of precision and flexibility would be virtually undefeatable in most scenarios. The rigid formations and predictable tactics that galactic navies had relied upon for centuries would be useless against such an approach. Bring him here, she ordered. I want to speak with him immediately. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood in her private chamber, his scorched armor replaced with simple civilian clothing. Without the bulk of his military equipment, he looked even more unremarkable than before, just another mammalian biped from a primitive world. But, the Queen's perception had changed. She found herself studying him with new eyes, looking for signs of the brilliant tactical mind that had just rewritten the rules of naval combat. Explain to me, she said without preamble, how you defeated that dreadnought. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his words. Your Majesty, have you ever watched a murmuration? A what? Starlings, Marcus explained. They're small birds on my world. Sometimes thousands of them will fly together in these incredible formations, twisting and turning through the sky like a single organism. No individual bird is controlling the movement, they're all responding to their immediate neighbors, following simple rules that create complex patterns. The Queen's eyes narrowed. You're saying you treated your fleet like a flock of birds? In a way, yes. Each ship captain had basic guidelines: maintain formation integrity, support your neighbors, strike when the enemy's attention is elsewhere. No complex orders, no rigid battle plans. Just simple rules that allowed the fleet to respond naturally to changing conditions. But, the coordination, Admiral Corax interjected. The precision of your timing. Marcus smiled slightly. My species evolved as persistence hunters, Admiral. We learned to work together to bring down prey much larger and stronger than ourselves. That instinct, that ability to function as a coordinated group, it's bred into us at a genetic level. The Queen felt a chill run down her serpentine spine. You're saying this is natural for humans? Not exactly, Marcus replied. But, we have potential that most species don't. We're social pack hunters who learn to use tools and think strategically. When you combine those traits. He shrugged. Well, you saw the result. For several minutes, neither the Queen nor her admiral spoke. The implications of what Marcus had revealed were too vast to fully comprehend immediately. A species with the natural ability to coordinate large-scale military operations with that level of effectiveness. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, may I ask you something? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Why does the position of Guardian exist? What is its true purpose? The Queen studied his face carefully. The outer rim is plagued by raiders and pirates. The Guardian coordinates defensive efforts, protects trade routes, maintains order. No, Marcus said gently. That's what the Guardian does. I'm asking why the position was created in the first place. The Queen exchanged glances with Admiral Corax. The human's question touched on matters that were rarely discussed openly, ancient fears that the great galactic civilizations preferred to forget. There are threats, she said finally. Beyond the rim. Things that the Council prefers not to acknowledge publicly. The Devourers, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. The Queen's multiple hearts skipped beats simultaneously. How do you know that name? Because we've encountered them, Marcus replied. 3 years ago, at the Kepler station. The Void Raiders weren't just pirates, they were scouts, testing our defenses, measuring our capabilities. We know what's coming. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the palace's environmental systems. The Queen stared at the human, her mind racing. If what he was saying was true, if humanity had already faced the ancient threat and survived. What did you learn? She whispered. Marcus's expression grew grim. That individual strength means nothing against them. They don't fight like civilized beings, they swarm, they adapt, they never stop coming. The only way to survive is to work together, to move as one organism, to be unpredictable. He paused, looking out the chamber's viewport at the stars beyond. My daughter and her Marines didn't defeat the Raiders through superior firepower or advanced technology. They won because they fought as one mind with 20 bodies, because they were willing to sacrifice everything for something bigger than themselves. His hand moved unconsciously to where the worn patch had been on his armor. That's what humanity can offer the galaxy, not just another warrior species, but a people who understand that real strength comes from unity. The Queen felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, genuine humility. She had mocked this human, dismissed him as primitive and unremarkable. But, in doing so, she had revealed her own limitations, her inability to see beyond the surface to the deeper truths beneath. The trials, she said slowly. They were never really about individual compatibility, were they? Marcus shook his head. I don't think so, Your Majesty. I think they were about finding someone who could unite the galaxy's forces when the real threat arrives. Someone who could get 100 different species to work together despite their differences. And, you believe you can do that? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I believe I have to try. Because if we don't find a way to stand together, we're all going to fall separately. The Queen rose from her throne, her 6 arms spreading wide in a gesture of formal recognition. Commander Chen, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber with regal authority, the trials are concluded. You have demonstrated capabilities that go far beyond what we expected or thought to test for. She paused, looking out at the stars where unknown threats waited in the darkness. The position of guardian is yours, if you will accept it. But, I must warn you, the responsibility is greater than you know, and the enemies you will face make the Void Raiders look like children with toys. Marcus inclined his head respectfully. Your Majesty, I've been a soldier for most of my life. I've learned that the size of the enemy matters less than the reason you're fighting. And, I can't think of a better reason than protecting the people who depend on us. As the human left her chamber to assume his new responsibilities, Queen Valestra remained by the viewport, staring out into space. Somewhere beyond the rim, ancient horrors stirred in the darkness, preparing for a war that would test every species in the galaxy. But, for the first time in centuries, she felt something approaching hope. The primitive human had shown her that strength came not from the individual, but from the bonds between individuals. That true power lay not in domination, but in cooperation. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity was truly capable of when they shed their individual concerns and worked as one. And the Queen suspected that the universe was about to become a very different place.